Hey y'all, happy Mother's Day. I'm excited because it is a very special episode of Scene because I get to honor my mama who does not know I'm doing this. So, hey girl, surprise. But I had the absolute honor of being raised by beautifully spirited women who taught me a lot, through their words, just through observation. And I want to share a little bit of that with you. So, this episode is built around what I've learned from my mother and her mother about joy and ease and living a spirited life. You're listening to Scene with Serena Kumara, a podcast all about the journey of coming home to ourselves, the unlearning, the remembering, and the returning to what's always been true about who we are and what we deserve. And as always, if you have not already, please hit subscribe, like the video, share with a friend who needs it. And if you're listening on podcasts, check out the YouTube. We want the views to get this thing in the algorithm. Okay, so number one, my mother taught me that the energy of your space is extremely important. Be intentional and invest in it. My mother has never played about the energy of a space. She sees the connection between the environment that you exist in and what that does to your spirit. So yes, we are talking about the things that are beautiful and aesthetically pleasing and how that makes us feel. But we're also talking about understanding what's underneath the energy. My mom, if there was some kind of tense moment or like the energy was a little funky before we left the house and then we would leave the house, if there was an argument of some sort, my mother would absolutely play music of a certain frequency. She would play a tape of it. I'm aging myself. Or like the flutes or something, so that by the time we got back, whatever energy was left there had a little bit more of a chance to be cleared. Okay. She never played about that. I can remember having bright colors in the house. I mention that all the time because it impacted me so much. Finding out later, certain colors have meanings. That's spirituality and psychology. And so if you're trying to pick yourself up, a yellow wall might be one way to support the actual work you're doing, right? I have clearly done a lot of that. I am really big on what they now know as dopamine decorating. And I remember expanding on that philosophy. I was deep in fighting like a low feeling. And I decided I needed to move from one apartment on one side of my building to another apartment on the opposite side of the building for a few reasons, but one of those reasons was because they were bigger windows. And I know if I open those windows and I allow the sunlight to come in, that is going to help to pull me out of it. And so there were days when I knew I had nothing in me, but if I can just get to the window and let the sunlight in, maybe I can get out of bed. And I know that that was rooted in what I learned from my mother about choosing the environment that is honoring to your spirit. Number two is the one that if you don't listen to anything else, keep this one with you. The wellness of your spirit is not an afterthought. It's very interesting because my grandmother and my mother lived very different lives. But what I saw in both of them is that they was going to swing for inner peace. Whether they had the language or not, both my grandmother and my mother realized that your spirit deserves investment, protection, and boundaries, peace, joy, beauty, all of the things. And I watched them fight for it in different ways. My grandmother had more resources and she had more support and she was in a different phase of life. She was retired and living comfortably. So for her, my grandma would get overwhelmed and she would go to some place. It's called Yoga Land, Yogaville. My grandma would have these bouts. I don't know if it was a silent retreat or what, but grandma would be somewhere for a couple weeks and she'd come back in a better headspace and skinnier. So I don't know what they had going on there, but she was going to fight for the wellness of her spirit. For my mother, it looked a little different because she didn't have the support that my grandmother had. So it might look like a little treat or going off by herself, seeing a movie by herself, or her walking on the water, like things that were about her spirit. She knew how to get her peace and she was not apologetic about going to get it. Another way that it looked, and she might be surprised to hear me say this, was through her boundaries. Sometimes it looks like, oh, I'm not going to have this conversation. This is going in circles and you're not going to drive me nuts, because if you drive me nuts, I'm going to be all off balance and it's going to impact everything. So I'm not having this conversation. You can stay mad. I love you. I will come back around, but I'm going to keep my sanity. I also witnessed from both of them what I'll call the investment of intention. There was a very clear choice to push towards positive, to not allow themselves to succumb, to know that the peace, the joy, whatever was imbalanced, that balance was available and they were going to get it. That's why I say they were going to swing for it. And that showed me the importance of that choice, right? That kind of alchemy, because it is a choice, right? There are many things in life that we cannot control, but we can do our best to move towards creating what we really want. I also want to make it clear that we're not talking about spiritual bypassing, right? We're not talking about trying to trick ourselves into acting like what's happening is not happening, or not allowing ourselves the space to honor what's happening inside of us and around us. But it's the choice that says, I'm not going to stay stuck here. If I need to cry today, I'm going to cry today. I'll also go find a therapist. I'll also go meditate. I'll also set a boundary that's going to help me get where I want to be. And that has saved my ass on more than one occasion because I was able to see it. And even in seasons where my mother maybe forgot, right? I have seen seasons where maybe she didn't show up for herself as much as she does now or in other seasons. I was also able to see the contrast. Now, number 3 is my favorite, because if you know my mom, you know that she is so sweet and really, really considerate of others and just like a generous spirit, right? But this is another side of her that not everyone gets to see, and it really blessed my spirit. The lesson is she has ancestors too. Now, here's the backstory. I was dating this guy. He was attempting to triangulate me and another woman. And the way that I found out what was going on was like purely psychic. I want to say it was claircognizance, where you just know something that you should know. You don't hear it. There's no evidence of it. You just know. And I think I was given instructions on how to verify said information. So this is at the beginning of embracing my gifts, where I felt like everything was my responsibility. I've been given this gift, like I'm just supposed to give out all this information. And so I was talking to my mother and I was telling her, I don't want to tell this girl what I know. Like, I don't feel like it. Because who wants to have a hey, Barbara, this is Shirley moment? Like, you just never know how it's going to go with the girls. But I felt like it was my responsibility because I had the information. I had to give it to her, because how else would she know? And my dear, sweet, loving mother said, she has ancestors too. And the same way that yours told you, they could tell her too. And when you hear that from someone who is completely unselfish, it does stop you in your tracks. Like, okay, maybe there's something to that. What she was trying to communicate is that she knew that I was trying to move forward. Like, I didn't want to be tied to this situation at all anymore. I wanted to move forward with my life. And what she was essentially saying is that if you continue to involve yourself in it, then you continue to involve yourself in it, right? Say your prayer, set your intentions that she finds out the way she's supposed to, because how do you know she don't already know? Hello. And you move on with your life. Everything is not your assignment or your responsibility, and it is okay to take care of your own heart in this moment. And that is a lesson that I have taken with me since then in so many areas, especially in this spiritual space, because if you walk through life like everything and everybody is your responsibility and your assignment, you will be exhausted and depleted and lack boundaries. It also helps to keep me grounded. I know we have met people who work in the spiritual space that act like they the only one with a gift. This reminds me, one, yeah, you got something, but everybody else has something. So don't get so high and mighty that you think like you are the oracle. And if they don't get it from you, they can't get it from nowhere. It helps to keep me grounded, which I appreciate. It also helped me to value how my intuition speaks to me through my body and in my spirit, because I now know the difference between feeling a pull to something that you won't enjoy and a clear stop. Like now, because I paid attention to what I felt in that moment, I now know the difference. Like I was not meant to say anything. Now I can feel like, I don't feel like it, but I think I'm supposed to, because it's a little lighter. Like it's a different kind of a flicker. And especially with how we are conditioned to not value that I don't want to the way that we should. Like that feeling of I don't want to is actually valuable, but because we are conditioned that it should be ignored and we should push forward anyway, that lesson helped me to do something different. And I think it served me. Lesson 4 is to stay open enough to keep becoming. Now, this I learned from both my grandmother and my mother, but we're going to start with my grandmother because hers was the loudest, the most pronounced to me. She taught me through her actions is that we are always learning and becoming and blossoming if we let ourselves, and it can make life so beautiful. The importance of staying childlike and progressive and open, and how that can truly keep life full. My grandmother was my best friend. And I don't mean that in the way that everybody's grandma is their best friend. That was the homie, okay? I was absolutely at a restaurant having cocktails at 25 years old with a 95-year-old woman, kicking it. That was the homie. And what always struck me is that we were learning from each other, right? Which my grandmother lived till 96. And so many would say, girl, you learned it all. Like, you're here to teach. She was asking questions. We progressed. Hey, grandma, it's not okay to say that anymore. Oh, no. And she would adjust her language. My grandma was never saying people are too sensitive these days. She would adjust her language if she could remember. The intention was always, oh, life is evolving and moving. Let me move as much as I can. One moment that really is special to me is a call I got from her. I know she was 96. This was maybe a couple months before she transitioned. She was calling to get my advice, my 25-year-old advice about how she handled a situation with someone. She didn't enjoy the person, but she wasn't telling the person she didn't enjoy them because the way she grew up, politeness and etiquette were king. And it's not always about authenticity. It's about being nice, right? But she felt inauthentic. And I'm the truth teller of the family. And so she was trying to get my opinion on that. And I remember thinking, well, grandma, you're 96. And so I think you should just be happy with whatever you did. What people get, they just get. And I remember her not really liking that answer. She appreciated being affirmed in that way. But what I realize now is that my grandmother was still in contact with people. She was still impacting other folks' lives. And her being mindful about how she was showing up had to be a major part of the reason why she left more positive impact than negative impact. And that's important. It's not just about her. And I think that she knew that. And so I take that with me and I walk into most days like, what's life going to show me today? Because the more I grow and the older I get, the more I realize how little I know. And I got that from my grandma. Now, for my mother, it's a little different. In this season of her life, my mother is exploring, but she's, I would say, re-exploring herself. And it is beautiful to watch. There are parts of who she was and how she lived that I think she stepped away from for survival when it was about providing and mothering and these very practical things. And now I'm watching her intentionally reconnect to who she is at a core level and a version of her that I remember from when I was very little and parts of her that I did not know, they happened before me. And it is really beautiful to watch her give herself permission to do that, to watch her enjoy this era of her life. And I know it's going to continue to keep her young. And I'm grateful for that because it also is teaching me, even if you disconnect, your soul self is always there. Now, lesson 5, my grandmother taught me, and that is that girlhood is healing at any age. I don't believe my grandmother ever lived by herself until she was about 86. I think she went from her parents' house to being a live-in nanny to moving to New York City with her big sister, where she met my grandpa and married him at, I think, 21 or 22. And they were married until he passed away at 86. Okay. You do the math on however many years that is. Right before he passed, they had bought a condo. Within days after he passed, the condo was ready. And I remember watching my grandmother use decorating that condo as a part of her healing process, right? Because imagine you spent essentially your entire life with this person. And my grandparents loved each other. Like, I've seen it, matching clothes and the whole nine. They loved each other. So I don't know what she was feeling. But I watched, like I said, she's going to fight for her spiritual wellness. I watched her do that through decorating the place like it was her first solo apartment, right? And so I can remember her, she had one bathroom with pink walls, and like the other bathroom was red, but it had like stiletto wallpaper. And she was doing these things to make it very much her own. I think the timing was impeccable, that she was able to leave the house that she had so many years of memories in with her husband to make this new space. And I watched that alchemy in real time. Like, it is very sad that her partner was not there. And I know she would have chosen him over that space. But what she decided to do was say, you know what? This is my solo era. Let me embrace it. What I also watched was her beauty rituals up until she passed. There was a time period when my grandma didn't go anywhere but to like the doctor and maybe the grocery store or wherever I would take her, because me and my girl were going outside. Okay. But she would keep a nail appointment. She would keep her hair done. She didn't let that go at all. And some of her little joys of the day was to like her nail polish or to get the experience of having her nails and feet worked on. And because I know my grandmother and I know how intentional she was, I know that that was not an accident. She was just a girl and she was using girlhood as healing. Because I do like a good fact. Beauty rituals and pleasurable objects are known to support something called savoring, dignity, and self-recognition. And personalizing your space can support identity and emotional well-being during major life transitions. Do I think she read it in a book? I actually don't know. My grandmother was highly intuitive, but she was also really smart and read a lot. I don't know what was what, but I definitely learned a lesson through her. This final lesson comes from my mother, and it is the only rule that I remember growing up with. Fun fact, I did not grow up with rules. Yes, there were expectations because it wasn't like the Wild Wild West, but hard rules, I don't remember any. In fact, at Thanksgiving, one of my aunts said of my mother that she never has any rules, but her kids somehow turn out great, okay? Now, my mother might argue that there were rules. We had a conversation and I said, Mommy, do we have rules? And she said, of course you have rules. And I asked her to name one and she couldn't. So I'm just going to leave that where it is. However, there was one rule that I grew up with. And I will leave you with this because it is truly profound. Do not put any forks in the toaster. All right, you guys, I love you. Happy Mother's Day. Meditate on that. And I will see you next week. Psych, I'm just playing. We still got to pull an affirmation from Unapologetic Affirmations by yours truly. There will be a link in the description box. And we got, remember, you set your own standards. Make them higher. Love you guys. I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like, and drop a comment. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, follow the show, leave a review, and share it with someone you love. You can find me on Instagram at SeenWithSerena and at serenakumara.com. Until next time, be wildly, radically, and unapologetically good to yourself. Love you.